So there has been a lot of talk about the UK Supreme Court ruling on sex and gender. In fact, I was on a LinkedIn Live on Friday and somebody asked me what my thoughts were. And I had none because I hadn't had time to actually process what was happening. I've now had a few more days and I wanted to jump on here really quickly and give some advice and guidance for any employee resource groups out there who are affected. And let's be honest, it affects a lot of people. So what we're going to talk about is, what happened? Where are we? What's happened? How did this ruling come about? What does it mean for employee resource groups? What do you do in terms of getting the support that you need and that your members need as well? So let's get into this. My name is Cheryl Miller, and this is ERG Strategy, the channel that helps you build effective, engaged employee resource groups and communities that make a big impact. So if this is what you're here for, please do subscribe, hit the notification bell. We release videos on Tuesdays and there is a live on Friday morning. So let's get into this. First of all, what has happened? So first of all, before anything, I am not a lawyer, as I always say. I'm not a lawyer. So please, if you have got, concerns about the legal stuff and you really want to get into that, I am going to refer you to some resources. But I must say, at the moment, I'm still waiting for the lawyers to kind of really come out with statements. At the moment, a lot of it is the media summarizing what it is that's happened, and some brilliant individuals in the DEI space actually who are summarizing it. But I am not a lawyer, okay? So what exactly has happened? So there's an organization in Scotland, a campaign group called For Women Scotland, who challenged the Scottish government's interpretation of the Equalities Act. And we're talking about the Equalities Act 2010 here, which, for those that don't know, the Equalities Act 2010 that the UK adheres to basically has these different protected characteristics and different protected groups. And when it talks about women in the Equalities Act, the Scottish government was basically saying that covered individuals who were transgender, so trans women effectively. And For Women Scotland argued that the word woman in the Equalities Act should refer to biological sex only. Some may argue that this is just a philosophical debate, because there's this whole thing around gender ideology and all of those sorts of things, right? And there may be some of that, but I just want to give you some of the background to the story. So one of the main situations and stories in terms of how this action came about, there were a group of nurses in the NHS, or the National Health Service here in the UK, and they were not happy about the fact that when it came to changing rooms, if you imagine they're turning up for their shifts at work, so when it comes to changing rooms, they were not happy about the fact that they may have to share changing rooms or change in a changing room at the same time as individuals who are transgender, who now identify as women. That was kind of one of the main stories behind this legal action. So they took this legal action. Obviously, it went all the way to the Supreme Court in the UK, and the judgment was issued last week. Now, what's really interesting, when that judgment was issued, regardless of which side you're on, the judge tried to deliver the result and the decision in as sensitive a way as possible. It doesn't matter which side you are on. The judge almost actually was instructing, there to not be celebrations or for anybody to not declare this a victory. The judge was saying, this really is clarification of a position. So what was the clarification? So just to explain that, within the Equalities Act 2010, there are two particular protected characteristics, and one is around sex, so sex discrimination, and that is where it refers to woman. And basically the Supreme Court said that refers only to women that have been assigned female at birth, so cisgender women. There is a second part in the Equalities Act 2010 which gives protection for individuals that have undergone gender reassignment. So that's kind of the headlines in terms of what was said. However, it's not as clear cut now. So getting into what does this mean now for employee resource groups? Hello friends, how are you doing? This is post edit Cheryl, right? I started recording this video a week ago and it's been with the editor, but also things have been changing so much in the legal landscape. I had to come back to this because some of the advice that I'd had included, which was coming out within a couple of days of the ruling, has proved to maybe not be correct. And this is, there have been debates in the public domain by legal experts. And I'm not a lawyer, as I keep saying, I am no lawyer. But even the lawyers are kind of slightly unclear on exactly what this means, apart from the fact that in the Equalities Act 2010, woman now means biological sex. And in the Equalities Act 2010, gender reassignment protection is there for people that are undergoing gender reassignment or have undergone gender reassignment, whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate. But in terms of what it actually means in practice, I'm confused. I thought I understood it. I'd read some of the summaries that came out, etc. There's somebody that I know that has read all 77 pages and she has come up with a view. But I'm slightly confused. I cannot lie. I know that some things some people seem to think are really obvious, but then within the legislation it talks about proportionate and not discriminatory and not there with the intention to exclude. So I don't think it's crystal clear. In terms of what it means for employee resource groups, so again, a lot of my advice from the original video will stand. So you'll probably see a lot of cutting between the two. That's because some of the advice does stand. The thing I want to be crystal clear about though is in terms of where employee resource groups are going, we are moving to a situation where the expectation is that employee resource groups generally should be open in terms of meetings. So the purpose of employee resource groups is to provide, kind of like safe space and inclusion and a sense of belonging for individuals from certain, either historically underrepresented or historically marginalized groups or minoritized communities. That typically or traditionally has been the remit of employee resource groups. For starters, in the US, the legislation at the moment is basically saying you've got to open up the whole thing to everyone. So this is almost like a non-issue if you were sort of like applying those principles. And I think even in the UK, I think we're probably moving more to a situation where the individuals that come together in an employee resource groups are people who care about that particular group or that particular issue, right? I think it's less about the membership of a meeting or of a resource group being based on an identity or a characteristic like sex or gender. Bear in mind, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just going to say that again. I am not a lawyer, and this law is incredibly unclear. There is something in the law, there is something in the EHRC, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission interim statement that suggests that things like, groups or memberships of larger groups can be defined based on single sex, but I don't even want to go into all of that. My advice for organisations, especially if, for example, you have women's networks, my advice is you have those open to individuals who are born female, identify as a woman, men, right? Because you're open to members and allies, right? So it's just open. So my advice is, if in doubt, just have it open, because that is kind of, I think that's the world that we're moving to anyway with employee resource groups. So rather than tying yourself in knots, I would say, just keep everything open so that you are welcoming everyone from all genders. The only caveat I would make to that, which, something that I talked about when I first recorded this, was if you are doing work that you specifically think needs to be exclusionary, and I use that term, kind of carefully, because of the sensitive nature of the work, then it's something really for you to consult with either your in-house legal team or external legal counsel, if you can do, and make a decision on that basis. But yeah, this is, there's going to be a lot of guidance and those sorts of things coming out. I think that we probably won't actually be crystal clear on the practical application until we start to get some legal cases, unfortunately, because this this has caused a whole amount of confusion, and hence why it's taken so long to get this video out. So apologies from post-recording Cheryl. So the courts basically said that the exclusion must be rare. So the exclusion must still be rare, proportionate, and it must serve a legitimate aim. I actually think if you're running a women's employee resource group, I don't think there's any change. I don't think there's actually any change. Now, the only caveat I would make to that, I am aware of one or two employee resource groups where actually they tackle some quite challenging topics. So, for example, I know of one particular employee resource group that has an initiative around domestic abuse. So, abuse in the home by a partner, sometimes called intimate partner violence. And say, for example, if you have an ERG that maybe has a campaign around sexual assault or violence against women and girls generally. And if there may be an element of that campaign that either includes, things like talking circles or therapy or groups or whatever it may be. And there may be individuals within your ERG, so there may be members that, state a preference for it to only be cis women or women who have been assigned female at birth, right? It's just something for you to think about. And those are really the only examples that I can think of where a women's ERG might be thinking, do we even need to have the conversation, right? Do we even need to have a conversation about whether realistically this is something we should be thinking about? I mean, the thing is, and if you'll have watched the last video around ERGs and membership, especially with what's gone on in the States in terms of the DEI rollback and not limiting membership in ERGs need to move to being open to everyone anyway. So even though the topic of focus may be, for example, the needs of women in this organization, the membership should still be open. So I'm really struggling to think of any scenario where it wouldn't be appropriate to have trans women involved in your ERG. And I say that not just because I'm supportive of trans rights. I say that just because even just interpreting the legislation, right? Now, obviously, the other group that I want to talk to is for anybody that's running an LGBTQ plus network, because these are incredibly, incredibly difficult times. And I can only imagine how your members are feeling right now and how you will be feeling right now as well. Because one of the things I have seen already, and we're only like 2 or 3 days in, I have seen an increase in transphobia and homophobia on LinkedIn. So in posts, I've seen that already. Oh, and in comments, I've seen it. So, there really is something. It reminds me of when we were going through the riots in the summer in the UK, right? It reminds me of a similar kind of feeling around it. And I know when those riots happened, there were individuals who were fearful of coming to work. There were individuals who were fearful to commute. Obviously, there were protests and things like that. And we may see that. I believe there have been some protests over the weekend. We may also get protests from the other side, if I put it like that. So there may well be clashes and things like that. So I know, based on experience of what happened when those riots happened, I know a lot of ERGs held safe spaces, facilitated typically by experts. So this isn't something I would really necessarily expect an ERG leader to do unless you are trained in this. So unless you are, a therapist or counselor or coach or mental health first aid trained. And I still would be encouraging you to make sure you are getting the support you need in terms of your emotional well-being, because this is heavy stuff, right? So when it comes to supporting your members, I would be getting legal advice where you can. I am going to signpost some resources below. So getting some legal advice, talking to obviously your HR teams, your DEI teams, and your comms teams as well, and also talking to health and safety. So again, thinking back to if people are literally fearful, or if as an organization you want to maybe limit the amount of, for example, travel or business travel that people are undertaking because they are fearful, that is something that you need to be speaking to comms and to health and safety about as well. The only other thing I want to talk about, I guess, is whether or not organizations will be putting out statements. I don't know. I mean, I guess some will, and some may well refer into you as employee resource groups to get your take. Obviously, you act to this as this kind of useful bridge internally to the community, and also in terms of the organization, just checking, almost just like temperature checking how things are. You may find that the organization is coming to you a lot more. So, all of that results in a lot more pressure, kind of like emotionally and time wise, which is why I'm also sort of saying make sure that you have got the support systems that you need. Take time out in the day to just have a little bit of a break, take some walks to kind of clear your head, right? Because these are tricky times that we're navigating. And that's it. If you've got any questions that I haven't covered, please do drop those in the comments or send me a DM, either through this method or on LinkedIn, which is potentially where there will be more conversation around the impact of this in the workplace. So if you want to do that, you can do. But I'm more than happy to dive into this some more once more information has come out and once more legal experts have come out as well. If I can, I will get a legal expert on here to talk about this, or on one of the LinkedIn lives to go into this in further detail. If you think that's something that would be useful, again, please drop it in the comments. And any other questions that you've got, just drop those in the comments, please, as well. If you have found this useful, please give it a thumbs up and do share it with your colleagues, with your ERG members. Subscribe to the channel, videos every Tuesday and the LinkedIn Live on Friday. And that's it on what for some people has been an incredibly heavy and difficult week. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time. Go with grace.